Hey everyone, welcome to the Time Wealthy Advantage. We're kind of doing a raw cut here. This is a live show streamed directly to YouTube and only on YouTube. So I'm going to be monitoring the comments. Usually I'm broadcasting on multiple channels. This is specifically for you guys and gals out there who are watching and watch the show. And we're going to be talking about why businesses fail today. And this is a topic that I run into. Actually, I was being interviewed today on a podcast, and we kind of went down this rabbit hole of economic stuff. And I am totally an economic nerd when it comes to macro stuff. I like microeconomics too, but I really enjoy the whole concept of macroeconomics and just understanding monetary supply and fiscal policy, monetary policy, all those sorts of things. So, and the microeconomic data that are also getting poured through these days. And I don't want to get too in the weeds on that stuff because that stuff, unless you're really a geek on that, too, it would make for a horrible show. I don't even know that I would want to rewatch it. But in the context of why businesses fail with a small business owner, this is incredibly relevant to you. And I was reviewing some shocking statistics, and the funny thing is, these statistics have not changed really in a really long time, from what I can tell. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, an average of 25 to 30% of businesses that start are going to fail within 2 years. That's a third. Within 5 years, half of them are going to be gone. So 50% of businesses within 5 years fail. If a business makes it to 10 years, it is the 70% of those businesses actually are likely to be gone. So you have a 1 in 3 chance of survival within 10 years. So, and then when you get to 15 years, I think it's 25% and so forth. But now we're not talking about business closing or anything along those lines, or maybe an owner selling or pivoting. We're talking about closing, a business failing. So if you got some questions, I'm going to try to hit you guys up, and if you want to post it afterwards, that's totally fine. But there's a couple things that relate to why businesses fail, and I really think there's a couple of really solid reasons to pay attention to this. Number one, I really feel like businesses, especially small business owners, in the early days, they do a horrible job of managing risk, or really even understanding the risk. Now, I work with a lot of small business entrepreneurs and a lot of folks, especially who like to be involved in real estate. Now, I got my start in real estate. I get it. I understand that getting into a property with no money down, there's lots of things to that's very attractive about that, right? Especially for wholesalers that I run into. I have had probably, I'm gonna guess, maybe 2 dozen coaching calls with new people who are interested in coaching, and most of those folks were telling me that they were into wholesaling. And the reason that they were getting into wholesaling, now, if you're not familiar with what wholesaling is, it's basically going out, finding someone who is in a distressed situation and making them an offer on a property that gets them out of that situation, and not taking ownership of the property, but finding another buyer of that contract. Okay, so that's what's basically a wholesale deal. Many states are actually looking to legislate against that, but that's another topic for another day, perhaps. So the interesting thing about this is that they're doing this because they don't have any cash. That's the thought. Okay, well, I don't have enough cash, so I'm going to wholesale, and therefore I'm going to build up my cash until I get enough money to either, get into fix and flips, or to get into buy and hold investing, rental properties and so forth, or whatever. And they don't understand the inherent risk in that. Okay, so we're going to come back to this in just a second when we talk about managing cash. It was funny that a U.S. bank had done a study. I don't have the year of the study, but it was done several years ago, and it was 82% had cited the reason that most businesses fail. Drum roll, please. What do you think? Poor cash flow. Like, they had to do a study to figure that out, right? Like, it's all related to poor sales, or sales projections that don't hit their targets. That's should be a no-brainer. But herein lies the problem. When you're heading into a business, and this is the point that I want to make, when you're heading into a business and you don't have enough cash to start out with, right? And you think you're going to grow, right? And build your cash along the way, if you don't understand the risk of that business, the chance of you being successful is vastly diminished, especially if you don't have enough cash. Now, there was a few folks who had, I would say, a reasonable amount of cash, but they also knew that they had to live on the cash that they had. So they were not only living on the cash that they also had to somehow make this business work and set that aside. So they were really leveraging their lifestyle with the cash that they had in order to start this business. Again, I did the same thing. Now, I will tell you, I gambled and I gambled hard and I lost huge in the early days. For those of you who don't know my story, I built up a $6 million portfolio in probably about 8 years. And in that $6 million portfolio, I had about $60,000 a month in revenues coming in each and every month. Now, I would love to say that that was free cash flow, but that wasn't. That was actually what I had to use to pay all of my operational stuff with my mortgages and basically and live off that money too. And I wasn't living super high on the hog, but I was doing okay, right? I was comfortable. But the problem was I didn't understand my risk, and I didn't understand the risk of when things go sideways, and life just shows up. Life just goes sideways. That's just the nature of it. So because I was so over leveraged, not just in money, but in my time, it was massively problematic when things went sideways, when basically the economy, in this particular case, the economy went to crap and I didn't have enough money. I didn't even have enough money to buy paint, right? I mean, I barely had enough money to keep in my truck, when it got really bad is when I didn't even have enough money. I had to pick between electric and water, right? Because I was just so broke. But here's the thing. This is one of the things that I run into, and I have this conversation all the time with my coaching clients, is that when they can learn to manage the most liquid form of wealth that they're ever going to have, which is their cash, that's when things can really change for them. And the biggest thing that I try to convey to folks, and this is really, really difficult, but think about this for just a second. Let's go back to the wholesale example here. I mentioned I want to close that loop. When when people are coming into the business and they want to do wholesaling, for example, right? They're forgetting one major thing. The one major thing that they're forgetting is the fact that they need cash to initiate the first of the four core functions of business. The four core functions of business are lead generation, sales, operations, and accounting. Lead generation, sales, operations, and accounting. Lead gen is just marketing. It's letting the people in the world know that you're out there. Now, many people you either have to have an abundance of time or you're going to have an abundance of cash. Because if you don't have an abundance of time where you can go and knock on doors and network and reach out to people on LinkedIn Messenger or Facebook Messenger or Instagram Messenger or what all the messengers are, or have all the time in the world to do all this outreach, you're going to have money to do some sort of outreach. So think about this. Think about the paradox that they just created. They don't have money, so they want to try to build a basically a marketing company without marketing dollars. It doesn't make sense. So, and the way that most of these people are doing it is they're leveraging it on some of the highest and most expensive loan constant debt and interest debt that they're going to have, which is their credit cards. Now, I say loan constant, meaning it's very, very high payments in relation to the overall outstanding balance. Okay, to calculate loan constant, it's pretty simple. Just take the annualized minimal payment, annualize that number. So if it's a minimum payment of say $100, you annualize the payment. So now you've got, let's say it's $100 a month. That's the minimum payment. Times 12 would be $1,200, right, per month. And then you divide it by the outstanding balance. So if the outstanding balance was $10,000, that would be a 12% loan constant, right? So here's the problem, right? It's a did I do the math on that right? So it'd be $1,000. All right. So my point is though, is you divide that by the outstanding loan balance, and that would give you a loan constant percentage. Now that only matters in relation to other debts, right? So if you've got other debts that are more expensive, then no problem. But if you have other debts that are less expensive in terms of your cash flow, then you want to pay on those higher loan constant debts. That's really the only metric that I use out, in terms of paying down debt. But here's the problem. Okay. So when you don't have cash, okay, and you're growing, here's something that's going to blow your mind. Growth sucks cash. And you might go, well, wait a minute. No, growing my business actually creates more cash. Yes, it does. But in most cases, especially when you have a business that revolves some sort of inventory. Now, in my particular case, I grew my rental business from 30 units to 60 units to 92 units very, very quickly, almost overnight. So what happened was I was making deals with guys who were just exhausted in the business, didn't want to be in the business anymore. So I was bringing in these swaths of properties, still buying additional units from the normal market, borrowing money from the banks that were loaning, 125% loan to value. And I wasn't stacking my cash. My fault. I'm going to own that. And I had so much growth in such a short period of time, I didn't have near enough cash to handle all of the excess inventory, just the needs to service the inventory. Nowhere near enough cash. I think at the peak of my cash with this $6 million portfolio, I had about $150,000 in cash. And of course, when the world went sideways in 2008 and all these people had been laid off, and that $60,000 went to $30,000 every single month, month over month. It was horrible, right? So, and I hear this all the time with guys like Grant Cardone and, that are, he's out there beating the drum that say cash is trash, and other people saying, oh, you got to use other OPM, you got to use other people's money. And trust me, no one was beating the OPM drum louder than me back in 2008. But here's what I'm going to tell you. It's fine to use other people's money. That's not the problem. The problem is when you're doing it at the expense of having your own cash. You've got to have your own cash. I promise you, Grant Cardone has plenty of operational cash. He's not using all of his operational cash for investing, right? He's using his excess cash for investing. He's got to have operational cash to offset the fluctuations in a marketing cycle or in a market cycle. So what is that number? It's going to depend. And it's going to depend massively on how much you want to leverage, what your risk tolerance is. Personally, I like having lots of cash. And I hear the criticism of, man, you're going to get too much cash and you're going to have, you're going to lose your purchasing power to inflation. I get that. Here's what I would say back to that. Yes, you're probably right. I'm probably going to lose some to inflation. No question about that. But here's the thing. I'm looking at my cash as my debt insurance. Because if I had more cash back in 2008, if I had just back of the napkin, if I had 10% of my assets in cash, which by the way, do the research. In terms of market cap, look at some of the largest companies. Look at what Microsoft has in cash or cash assets, right? Or liquid assets. Look at what Google has in cash or cash assets. Look at what Facebook has in cash or cash assets. Many of them are in the billions with a B, and most of them as a percentage of their market cap is somewhere between 10 and 20%. So you tell me, those are really smart folks that are running those companies. And if they're holding 10 to 20% of their market cap in cash, they probably know something. So here's what I'm saying. I like roughly, if I had 10% of my leveraged assets held in cash. So in other words, if I have a $30 million portfolio, for example, right, I would want 10%, $3 million in cash. And you go, man, that's a lot of cash. Yeah. But if I've got leveraged assets in that amount, and again, the only reason I'm coming up with this back of the napkin number is because of what happened back in 2008. Now, could I hold less cash if my assets weren't fully leveraged? Yeah, probably. But we're also talking about cash or cash assets. And here's the reason why. Because when the world goes sideways, when these tail events show up, and what am I talking about? A tail event. A tail event is a statistical distribution, right? You've got a bell-shaped curve. A tail event is those 6 sigma events that occur at the very outlier, right? Those are outlier events. Sometimes some people might call those black swan events, right? Nassim Taleb calls those black swan events. But when you get these events that show up, The people who are able to take advantage of these black swan events and make the most amount of money are the ones with access to capital, or they have cash, or they have both. And this is what I'm talking about. When you have cash, you have options. So this is one of the main reasons why many businesses fail, is they either start out with not near enough cash, or they just don't know how to manage their risk because they don't have enough cash. Now, I'm going to make one final point. We'll wrap this up. There's one other thing that you really need to consider and understand about the banking cycle, right? Right now, a lot of banks are struggling because they don't have liquidity. Now, what does that mean? It means that because of fractional reserve banking, where they're able to loan out more than they actually have on hand, when banks have a liquidity price crisis, it means that they don't really have the cash for operations, and part of their operations is to loan money. So if you understand how banks work, usually when things start to go sideways in the economy, or especially in the banking sector, the first thing they start pulling back on is their lines of credit. Now, not necessarily credit cards, but I'm talking about specifically either commercial lines or home equity lines of credit, or just lines of credit in general. Those are the ones that they're going to start to draw back on. Well, why is that? Because they can't afford to pay them out. They don't have enough liquidity to put out into the economy, right? That's generally, just think of it in that way. They don't have the ability to borrow because they've got so much, they're too overextended. So here's the problem, and not to get into the banking nuances of all that, because again, it gets on a bank's balance sheet is exactly backwards. All of the assets of a bank are the loans that they have, and right, all the liabilities they have are all of the deposits that they've collected from guys like you and me. So here's the problem, is that because they don't have the cash to loan out, right? They want to make loans, but they can't make loans, so they start sucking in those lines of credit. Now, if you have been relying on that line of credit because you didn't have cash and you said, well, yeah, I've got $50,000 in cash, but I've got a home equity line of credit that I'm going to use, for my house flipping business. Okay, great. So you've got a $150,000 line and say 50,000. So you're thinking you've got $200,000 of accessible capital, which isn't a bad thought, but don't hang your hat on that 150,000, because just like back in 2009, 2010, these banks are they can close that line. They can call the loan due and say, hey, we want all of our money back right now. And this is why it's really, really important to pay attention to the fine print when it comes to these lines of credit and how quickly they can call those things in. So that is all I have. So I think we'll just wrap it up there. But this is the main thing. I just want you to start paying attention to the amount of cash, the amount of liquid cash that you have on hand, because this is one of the things that I run into all the time with folks who are struggling specifically. Either they're struggling getting started because they don't have enough cash, or they're struggling in operations because sales didn't generate as quickly as they thought that they would have. And they've got all these either personal expenses or business expenses. Sometimes they're intermingled, so it's hard to tell the difference. But these are the sorts of things that will happen, and man, it just goes sideways. And all of a sudden, they're borrowing from really expensive forms of debt, which are which are credit cards or cash advances or whatever it is. And because the loan constant is so high and the interest is so high, man, it becomes a real problem in a real short period of time. So that's all I have. I appreciate you hanging around. I am working on the markdolfini.com site. So if you'd like to go out there, and you can see not just videos like this, but others from the Time Wealthy Advantage live show. If you would like to subscribe and do all that, you guys know what to do. I'm not going to tell you to remind you all that other stuff. So have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.